I do remember looking at him, seeing blood, and I think realising what I had really just done. I certainly knew I'd done something wrong. It wasn't like, yeah, I've done this and yeah, fuck you sort of thing. I knew I'd done something wrong, and I think there was a wave of guilt and shame. I could see like the police tape up and the forensics, and I was like, I had no idea what happened at that point. He could have died.
Welcome back to Crisis What Crisis, the podcast that aims to guide you towards a more resilient life and whatever it might throw at you. If this is your first time with us, then do please hit subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. It really does help make sure that these, I hope, useful conversations are shared as widely as possible. Today, I'm joined by a celebrated chef whose journey has taken him from a young offenders institute to working alongside Jamie Oliver and becoming a successful, very successful chef himself, with 2 hit cookbooks to his name. At 16, Jon Watts left school with no qualifications. Out of work, he fell into a gang and a life of petty crime, repeatedly being arrested. At 18, his life took a much darker turn, though, when he was jailed for causing grievous bodily harm, for stabbing another man in a fight, and sentenced to 6.5 years. Once in prison, a switch seemed to flip for Jon, and he began the work to turn his life around. Quite how he found that motivation for change is something we will talk about today. And we will talk about knife crime, one of the great issues of our time, from the unusual, but I think powerful, important perspective of someone who carried and used the knife and whose life and those of others was altered permanently as a result. As the only person to ever complete his bronze, silver and gold Duke of Edinburgh award whilst in prison, Jon discovered, in a prison kitchen, the passion and a talent for cooking that has transformed his life. So this is a conversation about finding purpose in the midst of crisis, about shame and about rehabilitation. We might also talk a bit about the healing power of food. Jon Watts, welcome to Crisis What Crisis.
Thank you for having me.
How are you?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Yeah.
Good. Well, look, first of all, congratulations on this.
Yeah.
Your second book.
Dream come true.
Well, that's great to hear, and I want to talk about that, Jon. But before we do, can I just talk about the intro to the book? It's very unusual for a cookbook. It's a no-nonsense summary of your story. You don't shy away from your history, including, of course, prison. And it strikes me reading it, you're a brilliant example, Jon, of how to put your failure to work, if I can describe it that way, to turn this piece of your past into something that's just wholly positive. I mean, is that a fair summary of your kind of view?
Yeah, definitely. Do you know what? It's not comfortable for me to talk about my background, about the prison, about what led me into it. But I do talk about it for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's part of the journey now. It's part of everything, like where I've come from, where I started to where I have got now, is all because of that. But also I see the effect it has on people from all walks of life as well. I mean, you might assume it's sort of young people getting in trouble or people in prison that take inspiration from it. But I get messages from people from all ages, all walks of life that take inspiration from it. So I find, I'm doing some sort of good by telling that story,
Yeah. I mean, you had a choice, I suppose. You could have decided, actually, once out of prison, I'm going to try and push that to one side, right? You were on your way. You were working with Jamie Oliver. Yeah. There were good things happening. You could have made the choice, actually. Yeah. Let's see whether or not I can just push that into somewhere a little bit, into a box and into a corner somewhere.
And I've been told to do that by quite a lot of people around me over the last 15 years. And at times I've wished I did, when certain articles have come out in the past, and they've always been positive, but you'd always get that little bit of hate, maybe. Those few comments.
So let's tell the story, Jon. You grew up in Oxford. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing. What kind of kid were you?
What kind of kid was I? I never usually go that far back. I think I was quite a shy, quite a quiet kid, actually. I wasn't a problem to anyone until I was about 14, I'd say.
Right.
And that's where I just started, I don't know, searching for purpose, I think is the best way to put it.
Did something happen? Was there...
No, nothing happened. Nothing happened.
How was school?
School... So I moved school. I went to I mean, we could talk for hours and hours on my upbringing, really. The first part of school, I went to what I can only describe as like a cult. I don't know how to go into it without spending the next 3 hours.
Well, so this is
talking about
outside of the state system?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Because your family were involved in... was it a religious thing, or was it?
Yeah,
right.
so it's slightly religious. I don't really know how to explain it too much, but the school system went from what's the beginning, reception to year 11,
Right?
And I left at the beginning of year 7, and then my brothers and sisters were a bit younger, and
you're the oldest, are you?
I actually have an older brother who went all the way through that school system. And now if you look at him, if you look at all of us in our family, you'll see the eldest brother and where he is and what he's doing. He went all the way through the school. Then I went the next, furthest way through it. And then I was the one that ended up in prison. And then they get better as you get younger. I don't know. I probably just offended my whole family.
The less time they spent in that school.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give us a flavour of the regime, just so we get a slightly better idea of...
I think... very strict,
right?
And I don't think being strict on anyone is ever a good thing. So very strict, very strong beliefs, and then basically what happened was one day I was called to the principal's office and he pulled me in by my hair, sort of yanked me in. So when I went home and told my parents, I think there was a few other things as well, but that was the sort of final straw for them to be like, right, pull the kids out of this school, right. And I don't know why I'm talking about this.
No, it's interesting. It's really interesting, Jon, because it is. We often do this with the pod. Is that you can find that, a route back. And I know for you, this is not about building some blocks towards an excuse.
Yeah.
Right. This is actually just an important part of the explanation, not excuse.
Yeah.
As to who you are, right?
Yeah.
And because and why it is you did all the things that you've done, good and bad, right? That's the purpose of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
So do you now, when you look at your life, do you now trace a little bit of explanation for that darker period of your life to then?
Yeah. I've never spoke about that before, but yeah, definitely. So when my parents pulled away from that, they sort of lost friends. They weren't a part of that community anymore. Almost shunned. It's almost like you're talking about the Amish people in America or something.
Yeah.
So then I moved into the state school system, and I just felt different. And I think that's the thing with me. I've always felt different. And I had friends, but how to explain it? I had like groups of friends, but I've never had really close group of friends. Yeah. Like never had those.
You felt a bit like an outsider.
Yeah. I suppose I was an outsider. Yeah, I was going in there as an outsider, and it took me a little while to adjust. 11, probably at that time. So it took me a little while to adjust.
Were people aware? Were the other kids? Were the teachers presumably were aware of where you come from?
No. And I did have a couple of friends just from the road I lived on, because we were travelling to this school like an hour in a minibus every day, and then suddenly I was in the school in the town, which was a 10-minute walk. So I had friends from my road that I'd sort of grown up with, and they went there. So it was sort of a bit of luckily I had that sort of step into it. But yeah, it did make me feel like an outsider. And then I suppose maybe as I grew comfortable in that system, and then I'm 14 years old, and then I just found myself, I've often said misunderstood. I was getting detentions a lot. Often I didn't understand why I would get it. It just became a thing. Like I'd have to stay after school for detention. Half of my lunchtime was the detention, whether it was for missing homework or maybe just talking in the class or something. Just little things like that.
But it slowly sort of built.
I think it just
to the point where you started to reject a bit in terms of the teachers, the system.
Yeah, I think
kicking
so.
Back against it.
I think that whole sort of thing just continued all the way through up until I left, and I just felt misunderstood, misguided, or not guided at all. Sorry, kind of ignored, I would say. Yeah. I think little things that affected me at the time, which I just didn't speak about, I could have said to the teachers, I really want to do woodwork, which is something I wanted to do. And, you pick all your subjects in like year 10, I think it is. And I picked all my favourite subjects and I didn't get any of them. So then they put me in the classes that no one else wanted to do, which was like graphics and geography. But that just made me feel like, oh, no one's listening to me. No one cares that I want to do this lesson and this lesson. So maybe that's a part of why I sort of started to become disinterested in school as well.
Yeah, and probably at that age a bit confused about it all as well, right?
Yeah,
I mean, was it a proper conversation at home about, I don't want to pry into your family's faith or quite what was sat behind it, but was there a proper conversation going at home? Was it explained? Did you really understand where you'd been and what had happened?
No, not at all. I think with my family, so I'm one of 5 kids, and my parents were together when I was growing up, and it was always, my dad was at work all day, my mum was there, she'd, be looking after the kids, then he'd come back, she'd go off to work. So it was like, it felt like a bit, I would describe it a little bit like a jungle sometimes.
Right.
A lot going on. And I think my dad had his issues in the past, like he used to be quite an angry person, I'd say. So, he'd come back and he'd sort of be like, oh no, now you got to behave, or now you got to, just very strict again there.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's a bit like, if you squeeze something, it pops out the edge, isn't it? I suppose it's a little bit like that, to give an analogy.
Yeah.
And then, so...
How were you coping in terms of lessons? Was it
lessons at school?
Yeah.
I used to spend my time daydreaming a lot of the time. It depends. If I was in the lessons with some of my friends, I was a bit... I'd misbehave a little bit. Not to like a really bad extent. And I wasn't not intelligent either. Like I sort of sat around the average, maybe even above average in some of the classes. But yeah, if I was in the classes and my friends were in there, I tended to just sort of daydream, I think I'm...
And that drifted into you really kind of giving up to an extent. Is that a
by the time
description in terms of the the formality of school, the exams and the and what would normally happen within a school system, you just kind of reject it.
Yeah. When it came to year 11, I didn't revise as some kids would, going home and revising and stuff. I didn't care, to be honest with you. I think I got D's and E's. Probably could have got C's. Probably could have got B's if I really got my head into it. But I think one of the reasons I didn't really perform then is because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know how to do anything. Some of my friends were saying, I'm going to end up at university, or I'm going to get an apprenticeship, I'm going to get a job here, I'm going to stay on at sixth form and, do a sports science class or something like that. I just had no idea. I was like, oh, you mean I haven't got to go to school anymore? And that was one of the biggest reasons for me feeling, I think, lost, frustrated. Could have really done with somebody just going, moving me in that direction. And, as an adult, you want to find your own way. But I think as a kid, you just don't understand where to go next or what the next steps might be to get on a path.
Yeah, but also not trying to apply some sort of amateur psychology to it. But if I've understood it correctly, you were for a number of years in what sounds like a pretty abusive environment, right? That's the school that you were at. That needed to be dealt with. It needed to be dealt with, but it needed to be discussed. It needed to be understood at some level. That never happened.
Abuse that reminds me, because what they call it, corporal punishment? Mm-hmm. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Because it was class. It wasn't like private school, like your typical private school, but it was classed as private because it was all just the parents of the church had sort of put it together, and they didn't outlaw the cane until must be mid-90s, I think, in the private system. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And they were using, if you did anything wrong, what it did is get a table tennis bat and whack the back of your hands.
What?
Which just seems crazy if you think about it now. I don't understand how an adult.
So they would do that to you?
Yeah, I don't understand how an adult.
So this is using the paddle of the bat.
The side of it.
The side of the bat would be whacked against your hands.
Yeah, I don't understand
and you're how old at this stage?
You'd be child, 5, 6. I think it probably got outlawed when I was about 6 or 7, something like that. I can't understand how an adult does it. When I think back now, I'm like, if there's a 5-year-old boy, I can't imagine doing that to a child. But that's about a different time, I guess. But
the last straw for your parents was when you came home and said, the principal dragged me by my hair into their study.
Yeah, that's what I remember. I don't speak to them about it that much. There's probably so many other things that sort of made them pull us out, but that's what I remember.
So you leave school, no qualifications, don't know what you want to do.
No, nothing. Once I left school, I spent about 3 months. I was just sleeping in until midday. I'd get up. I used to have really boring days, basically waiting for my friends to finish doing what they're doing, and then I'd go out and just basically cause mischief, be a kid.
Yeah. But as you get older, 16, 17, that starts to get a bit more serious.
Yeah.
There's kind of petty crime. You're in a gang, essentially, aren't you?
Yeah, I hate using the word gang because, this was Oxfordshire and, it wasn't gangs like you.
It wasn't South Central Los Angeles.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's exactly what the judge said to me when he sentenced me. Something along those lines.
Right.
But, I don't know if you remember, this was sort of 2006, 2007, and the headlines were Broken Britain and there was hoodies everywhere. And I think, I might be remembering this wrong, but I think the whole country had a bit of a problem with young people in sort of postcode wars.
Yes.
Do you remember any of that?
I do, because I was working in politics at that time, and Broken Britain was a political theme. It was, a regular conversation in the media for sure.
I sometimes think nowadays, I'm like, maybe I was just remembering it like that because I was involved so much, but I feel like there was a problem all over. But yeah, I got sucked into that sort of thing. We were just a group of people, young lads from my town, anywhere from the ages of probably 14 to probably 24, and even a few older people getting involved in it, with essentially wars with the same group of people from other towns, which just sounds ridiculous when you talk about it.
It does, but it is a truth about our country. It's not, and we're jumping forward a bit, but when you go into prison, you meet, I certainly did, met a tremendous amount of lads who were there because of postcode related crimes.
Yeah.
The kind of county lines, as they would sort of, some of them would describe it.
Yeah.
So it was a truth about, and is certainly still a truth about our country. But you're caught in a version of that. How does it sort of escalate? How did it develop for you?
I just felt so frustrated because I always felt like I could achieve something. I always felt like I could be someone, but I didn't know how, and that was the biggest thing for me. And I did get jobs. I think, what was my first job? I worked in a garage at one point, which I quite enjoyed, but I couldn't really deal with the authoritative level, that comes from a normal boss at that stage in my life.
Same again as with school, rejecting the teachers, an authority issue.
Exactly.
Again, don't want to apply some amateur psychology, but it's not very hard to work out why that might be.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Given what happened at school, in the earlier school.
Yeah, and that theme continued. I would have a job, I worked in a supermarket, worked in a couple of warehouses, on building sites, and it would always last less than 3 months. So I'd sort of have a job for a little while, and I'd have a job for a little while. And, I found my purpose. I felt that sense of belonging, being in that group of people, getting involved in this absolute nonsense. And this is why I just think it sounds so silly now when I talk about it, but it gave me that sense of belonging. It made me feel like I was a part of something. Yeah. And I just became completely embroiled in it. And it was a violent place more above anything. It was just mindless violence all over the place.
Tell me about that.
It sort of started, this was the beginning of social media. So I don't think Facebook existed. It was like Bebo and MySpace were sort of around. So it sort of opened that door to, the keyboard warrior type stuff. And MSN was about, the instant messenger. And you'd have like little arguments with these young people on there, and then it just spilled out onto the streets, and it just escalated and escalated and escalated. And, at the height of it, what you had was like, the town I was in wasn't as bad as the one that we were always fighting against. And what they would do is like get on the buses, and you just get a busload, like double-decker bus full of teenagers armed with all sorts of weapons, just coming out, almost like, those football hooligan films, and they come out and everyone just starts fighting. And all sorts of people got caught in the crossfire as well. I mean, no one actually died, luckily, but people were hurt quite badly. And I think when that sort of thing happened, it then became a pride thing as well. If they drove down and, you hear, oh, someone's just been beaten up real bad by this group, you'd be like, oh, now we've got to get revenge on them.
Was it purely territorial, or was there also other things at play? With drugs at play? Was there...
Yeah, there was that.
elements?
There was all that sort of thing. I actually was never involved in any of that. There was a massive drug culture where I grew up, actually. A lot of them, a few people I used to hang out with are already dead through drugs or still involved in drugs, whether it's dealing or taking and that sort of thing. But I'm quite lucky. I never felt like I wanted to get sucked into that. I think I saw a few things at maybe a young age where it put me off.
For example?
Just like I used to hang around with some older lads who maybe mid-20s and just see them off their faces on ketamine and, different things where I'd just see it and it would just be disgusting. And, you'd hear stories of their friends who've just overdosed on heroin and just little things like that. So it just put me off. I didn't want to be...
But that was that was a mature decision. That stage in your life, you were... that's, if you look back, you made a lot of mistakes, Jon. I know you say that yourself. You made the right decision there.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Could easily have gone the other way.
Yeah, I suppose it would, yeah.
So that is a part of you, actually, even at that early stage, saying, no, that's not going to happen to me.
I suppose so.
Yeah. As I understand it, the sort of petty crime, I'll use the word gang again, apologies just for explanation, those moments escalate. I think you're arrested a number of times before the crime that led to prison. Am I right? There was quite a number of moments.
Yeah, always. When you say petty crime, it was just being mischief. Like, I was arrested the first time for criminal damage, and it was just mindless. Again, a bit similar to how I was at school. Didn't really understand what I was doing. I pulled some, being about 15, I think I was. And I'm in the town centre. I was pulling some plants out and throwing them at my friends as missiles, which I think is a normal-ish thing for a kid to do. You don't think about some poor fellas just put the plants there and it makes the town look pretty. So that was like the first time I was arrested. And it was just little things like that, or I was arrested for things that sometimes my friends had done, and just bits like that. I think I've got maybe 4 convictions. So it's not like my list of convictions is huge, but I was getting arrested or just getting in trouble a lot.
Yeah, but none of those were enough for you that switch that comes on later in your life. None of them were enough to cause that switch to come on, or to open your mind to, actually, do you know what, this is not the way to go.
Because
I've got to sort of change direction here.
Is it the same as at school? I just felt like misunderstood, like I shouldn't have been in trouble. And actually, talking of being in trouble, that's something maybe I could talk about in a bit. Like, I think one of the reasons I did okay once in prison is that I took responsibility for what I did, and I noticed quite early on that people who definitely deserved to be there, for some reason, didn't believe they should have been there, even though they committed the crime.
Sure.
And, I think it's about that taking responsibility. But, as a teenager then getting those little bits of trouble, I didn't think, oh, no, what have I done? I thought, oh, why am I getting in trouble again?
Yeah.
Or why are they picking on me? It was a lot of that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what happens in 2007, I think.
Yeah.
You get involved in, something of a different order. Can you just tell us what happened?
So, yeah. You'll see me now, my body language will clamour up because I really don't like talking about it. But I know it's an important thing to talk about. So, a bit like I mentioned just now about the teenagers coming down, the weapons, to give an example of the sort of thing that would have happened. So, there was one instance where a car pulls up, a bunch of lads jump out, various different weapons. One of the group I was with was on crutches. Everyone else forgets about that. You run because these people got all these weapons. They almost kill him. He was lucky. He was in hospital for a number of weeks, had quite bad injuries. That was the sort of thing or be up against. And so I carried a knife with me for when I talk about, but if you asked me back then, why are you carrying this knife? I'd say it's for my protection. You know, this is what's happening on the streets on a daily basis. I've got to have it for my protection. But in hindsight, and then taking responsibility as well, it was for protection, but it was also to create fear. You know, it was also so that, you know, if I did come across those people, I could be the aggressor, let's say. Never thought I'd use it. Never, ever. It didn't cross my mind. I know, like, the statistics on if you carry a knife is, like, ridiculous. It's either going to be used on you or you're going to use it. Didn't cross my mind once. And, you know, that was going on and on and on. And then one night in 2007, I was really not in a very good headspace, I will say that. And got in a fight at first, actually, so that almost, I suppose, the adrenaline's running and everything.
Just the two of you, or
yeah,
a group?
It was just the two of us, and
just on the street, it was it.
Yeah, so it was a guy I'd had a few run-ins with before, and was already just not in the right headspace. So something kicks off, but very small, nothing really happened. But suddenly my adrenaline's running a little bit. Then a bit later, there was alcohol involved as well, so I was a bit drunk, and one of my friends gets involved in this fight. By this point, it is just me and him, and yeah, a fight ensues with this guy. I do feel like, so I don't talk about the offence very often, like I said, but it is very uncomfortable, and there's all sorts of other factors at play as well. I wouldn't want to, but
I just want to stress again, because I know this is your attitude from what I've read before. This is explanation, right? This is not excuse. You're wanting just to explain.
I do feel like I always have to sort of back it up.
Yeah.
I think one reason why it's important to talk about the offence is because, especially online now and with my profiles got bigger, sometimes you can see speculation, and then it's like, you know, you see the trolls will say, you know, when I mentioned about my journey and I was in prison and you don't talk about the offence. Yeah. And then someone will say, oh, he did something to a 6-year-old boy. And you're like, what? Hang on.
Yeah. So to set the context is important, right?
Yeah. And
so you're in a fight.
Yeah.
And you use the
knife.
This
is an adult male, because the other question sometimes would be, was it a woman, and was it this, or was it that? Yeah. So it was an adult male. He was part of... he was an older guy who's a part of the... or had links with the older sort of group that almost ran the town, that side of the town, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the knife was used. He was in hospital for a couple of weeks, did make a full recovery, as far as I'm aware. And it created a massive rift in the town. So this was June 2007. I suddenly had to, like, it was really difficult to know who was behind me and who wasn't. So people that I was like acquaintances with were suddenly out for me, if that makes sense.
Right.
So rather than being the little petty war with this other town or any other town, it was now that, and then on top of that, the same thing in my own town.
Right, okay.
And I had to be very careful about where I was. I didn't really venture far from my home.
You just thought that there'd be some sort of retribution.
Well, there was. Yeah. I wouldn't venture far, and like I used to, I had a lot of friends at this point, and I had people who would be nearby who would like phone me up and say, so and so's on the way. These people are on the way. So I'd have that almost every week, maybe, where get a phone call, so and so's coming. All right, I've got to get out of here. There was a lot of that, always running, always looking over my shoulder. And then one day, there's so many angles to the story, so I sort of get lost and sort of backtrack and stuff. Yeah. My older brother was a part of that sort of world. He had a bit of a reputation and knew a lot of different people. And some people were not coming for me because of him.
Right.
But what came out later was that he did give some people the okay to go and sort of get a little bit of revenge.
Your own brother did
Yeah. So then one day I'm in this place and some people around me. Suddenly, it's a park and it was quite dark at night. I'm sitting there with two girls, two of my friends, and then suddenly it just went really quiet, almost like a tsunami, and the wave goes out. It was like all the people had just gone out, and I was like, whoa. And then these three big blokes just come out, and I was quite a small lad. I mean, I'm short now, but back then I was an 18-year-old boy, and they just pummeled me, and my eye socket was broken, my nose was broken. And yeah, at this point, I mean, this was probably October 2007. So to backtrack slightly, after the offence happened, for some reason, I have no idea why, I was bailed. I was arrested the next day. I admitted it in an interview. They had the knife. I have no idea to this day why I was bailed. But it was a blessing, despite what I just told you about that. That part wasn't. But I was able in that time to actually sit back and think, this isn't where I want to go in my life. I need to make a change.
Immediately after the offence.
I'd say in
the period after.
The period
But you're
after.
also dealing, just to make sure I've understood this correctly, you're also in that period dealing with this retribution issue.
Yeah.
That has your brother in the middle of it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, in any circumstances, quite a lot to work through.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And what can I ask you? Having used the knife, what was your reaction to having used the knife? What was your
Immediately?
reaction? What was your reaction in the moment?
I got goosebumps from that. It's really hard to describe. I mean, it is hazy in my memory. I think it sounds bad saying it. I think when I was the aggressor, but it was a traumatic thing for me to do as well. I certainly knew I'd done something wrong. It wasn't like, yeah, I've done this and yeah, fuck you sort of thing. I knew I'd done something wrong, and I think there was a wave of guilt and shame. I got rid of the knife, which obviously meant I knew what I did wrong. I didn't sleep that entire night. I went back to where it had happened, so it's quite hard to describe. Where it happened was like there was a car park that overlooked it, and to get from that car park to go there, it would have taken 20 minutes to walk, but you can see what's happening. And I could see like the police tape up and the forensics, and I was like, I had no idea what happened at that point. He could have died. And so I didn't sleep all night, got up the next morning, like from my bed, having not slept, and just went and sat on a bench waiting for my friends, the one who was with me and another one. And I was just sat there for a good few hours. And then we just sort of wandered around the town. One knew what had happened, one didn't. And then I came across a police officer who I knew quite well, who was in a friendly way. And she sort of said, oh no, the guy's stable. So I knew then, like, okay, at least I haven't killed somebody.
Can I ask the question, John? Where did you stab him?
Abdomen area.
So he could have died?
Of course, yeah. I mean, you don't realise whether or not you stab someone in the leg, which is sometimes what these kids do. You can easily hit an artery, but I mean, I suppose that this same police officer is the one that found him. So when it happened, actually, sorry, going back again, it's a muddle in my head, which is why it comes out as a muddle when I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Immediately after it had happened, I do remember looking at him, seeing blood, and I think realising what I had really just done. So I sort of nudged him towards walking up to town. I was, head that way. And then maybe 15 metres up, he collapsed just as this police officer was coming down. Sometimes I wonder if she's a guardian angel, for him or me, maybe both, I don't know. But she happened to be there immediately and was able to obviously give first aid and get him to the hospital quick. And it scares me so much thinking about that.
You still get the emotions now?
Yeah.
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 So, John, there's this period of time, you're heading to a court, I suspect you've worked out
I was going to prison.
You're heading to prison. And you start to prepare yourself. I mean, can I ask, what was the family reaction? I mean, particularly with the element of your brother as well. I mean, that must have been incredibly confusing, difficult, traumatic?
Yeah. I've said this before, it's the only time I've seen my dad cry, when I came back from the police station that day. And that first, it had a bit of bravado about me, fake bravado, you know. And I just remember him standing in the window, as he always did, and then he just face scrunched up and he was crying. Maybe that was one of the biggest things for me as well, like then realising, this is something I've talked about after as well, the amount of people you affect in something like that. It's not just you and the person there, it's everybody around you in the community. It's his family, his mum, his grandma, his sister, it's my brothers and sisters. Like, they would get sort of not abuse, but they would get affected by it, comments about it. You start thinking, you could go from all angles. That police officer, you know, the fact she had to deal with someone like that in that state, and then the people in the hospital, you know, you just don't think about it until, you know, I suppose that moment where I saw my dad crying and I was like, oh. So I think that might have been the first step in me going, okay, got to make a change, got to turn this around. Certainly going into prison, one of the things I wanted to do was make people proud, or at least not ashamed. Is probably more likely.
Can I just say, before we move on to this next phase of the story, I just think this is such an important conversation.
Do you?
I really do, John. You know, knife crime is the unsolvable problem in this country, right? And I've sort of looked at it from the angle of newspapers, where I ran campaigns, and from politics, where it was a big part of the Broken Britain agenda was, what do we do about knife crime? The answer at that stage was, you know, put more people in prison. And it continues to be, you know, a growing, unsolvable problem in this country. For you to sit here now and to explain in very stark detail the reality, and by the way, you're the one holding the knife and telling that story, the listener and the viewer, whoever's watching this, can make up their own minds, but I just think that's incredibly important and, dare I say, a very brave thing for you to do.
Yeah, well, I hope it has like a good effect, because I think, you know, when I talk about offence and you say grievous bodily harm is one thing, but when you talk about a knife, there is, you maybe see it in my face as I'm talking about, there's so much shame, you know, in it for various reasons.
But, you know, if we don't talk about this stuff, then all we're going to keep doing is chucking people in those situations into prison. And by the way, I'm not suggesting, I don't think you hold the view that you shouldn't have gone to prison. I think you hold the view you absolutely should have gone to prison, right? Because it was a violent crime. You could have taken someone's life. But we've got to have the conversation about what leads to that to even begin to find some solutions to it. I just wanted to say that before we move on. So you know you're going to prison. You're sentenced to 6.5 years. Did you expect a sentence of that length?
No. So I went into prison in January 2008. So it was like 6 months of being on bail, not knowing what's going on. I was told different things. I was told 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. Anyway, then I went into court, pleaded guilty, was remanded, pre-sentence report and stuff was happening, so I was going to be sentenced in February.
So you went into prison at that point on remand?
Yeah.
Into the young offenders?
Into the young offenders. Yeah. And in that month where I was on remand, the police come in and arrested me for an ABH, actual bodily harm, which had happened over a year before the other offence. And it was basically, now I was in prison, now I was away, someone obviously felt like then they could go and say, oh, he also did this.
So you were tried for that other offence as well?
I went to court with that. So that was a lot of my friends were involved in that one, and I thought there's no way they're going to turn up to court. And that one, I think I was hard done by.
Right.
I said it was in self-defence, and I still stand by it. But they did turn up. So my barrister told me to, you know, they probably won't turn up to court, so take it to trial. And then they turned up on that morning, and I did just think, I can't be bothered with this.
So you've got people who are your friends now going to court to give evidence against you.
Use the term friends loosely, you know, when you're younger.
But part of your group, yeah. Right.
So you know, by this time, because it takes a while to get to trial, by this time it's been 6 months in prison. And I was like, let's just I can't remember what it's called. You like plead guilty on the basis of, and you sort of give this statement. I think that's just a principle thing, really. You want to say, this is.
So that was rolled up, and that ends with a 6.5-year sentence.
Yeah. So
can I just backtrack slightly? Going into, because it's going into prison after you got your sentence, but you've already been in prison. You've been on remand. So you've now worked out what prison is. You've been there for a while. Just tell me about tell me about the first day of going into prison on remand. You're 18 years old.
Yeah. So if I think about going into prison now, I'd be devastated. I'd be like, my life is ruined and stuff like that. Back then, it was like, right, next step. Knew I was going, had nothing to live for outside. Even if I somehow didn't end up in prison, my life was not going anywhere I wanted it to go. So that meant nothing. So going there was just, I suppose, in a way, a fresh start. You have to be assertive in prison because I think you've got a lot of people that will prey on the weaker people.
Those first 6 months, you navigated pretty safely, did you? I mean, no trouble, no grief.
I told you about the lad that had been beat up pretty badly, and a lot of that was about 6 lads from the other town. They were all in there, which was the worst thing for me. I was having to be really careful about where I went in the prison. Like
I should say, the system, as I understand it, the system tries to.
They do.
Be aware of those kind of issues. I mean, quite difficult thing to do, actually.
Yeah.
Never mind Oxfordshire. Try North London. I mean, it's difficult to pick these things apart and try and set. But they do try. But there was no attempt to.
They do ask you the question, but I mean, one of the things you learn early on in that sort of world is you can't snitch. Is the word?
Yeah.
You have the vulnerable wings of the vulnerable prisoners. That might be where the sex offenders are and that sort of thing. But it's also anyone that's accused of any sort of snitching.
Of course.
So it's like I didn't tell them anything, and I had to just
deal with it.
I got lucky. I mean, there was one time where there was 4 or maybe 5 of them waiting for me outside the education block, and I think that's the only time where I was really like, something's about to happen. And for whatever reason it didn't. They sort of intimidated, and I just I don't even know how I dealt with that. It was just I didn't react in any way. I think that was probably the important thing. I just sort of let it happen and moved on, expecting to have to defend myself, but I didn't have to. That was a difficult time, though.
When did so you'd already worked out pre-prison, pre-remand, I can't do this anymore. Something's got to change.
Yeah.
So actually that's when the switch flipped, if I can put it as crudely as that. So by the time you're then, I imagine, just totally occupied with getting ready for the sentencing, whenever that moment's going to come. It comes. It's 6.5 years. You clearly had this other offence that got involved. That must have taken up a lot of headspace and lawyers' meetings and whatnot. And then you're sentenced, and then right, okay, I can see now where the door is. Did you have that feeling, having been sentenced? Could you work out how long that actually meant in prison? Did you feel like, okay, I know where the door is now, let's start planning for that?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things I avoided was the IPP sentence, which I don't know if you know.
I do,
so,
yeah.
Which is
not what you want.
No, horrible thing.
We should explain that's a kind of indeterminate sentence.
It's basically
a sentence without end.
It's a life sentence, but with a smaller minimum term.
Yeah.
And, I knew people who, or now learning of the stories later on, people who get a 1-year term for a fairly petty crime, but they might have done quite a few of it. Yeah. And then they spend 15 years in prison.
Exactly. Because the process, once you've got one of those sentences, is you have to tick a certain number of boxes to then be able to get onto the parole board to be able to get your freedom.
And you've got to be in certain places to tick these boxes. Exactly. And sometimes you can't get to that place. Sometimes that course isn't available that you have to tick it. Yeah, absolute nightmare.
So you feared that you were going to end up with an IPP and you didn't.
Yeah. Well, it was, so I think talking to the lawyers maybe it wasn't really a thing, but talking to the people in prison and seeing the other sentences of people, it was like, they were handing them out like sweets at that point.
They were, yeah. It was a political had a lot of political momentum behind it.
So I got. I do see the logic behind it if it worked well. But yeah, it didn't. And so, yes, I mean, standing in the dock, I remember finally getting a sentence. I've heard every sentence from 3 years to 9 years. And yeah, I got 6 years and then 6 months consecutively for the other one that happened. And what were the feelings? It's hard to describe. I certainly felt like it was longer than I thought I was going to get. And I remember going back. I knew then, or thought then, I would then be going into the adult establishment. And I went back to my friends in the prison. You know, you get back, it's all dark because it's late at night. Take my bag up because every morning you go out to court, you have to pack up all your stuff, take it in a bag, come back, go in. And I went to one of my friends who just got 5 years. And I was like, I've got 6.5. So I was like, oh no, I'm here for longer than him. And I think I felt quite bad about that sentence. I was like, it was a bit of a shock to me, let's say. The next morning, you get half an hour in the exercise yard. That's where you can use a phone. So I go out straight to the phone home. My dad answers. I said, how are you feeling? He said, we feel better now because we know when you're going to get out. So I suppose he saw the door rather than me.
Yeah.
As soon as I hung up the phone, there was like a weight lifted off my shoulders. And the thought in my head then was, I'm going to have to do whatever I can to give myself an opportunity when I'm released. And I want to make people proud or not ashamed. That was the goal.
And you worked that out quite quickly, really, Jon. I mean, you had some time to prepare and think. But you're still a young bloke as well.
Yeah, still 18.
So that's pretty mature, you know, kind of sophisticated thinking. Given the story that you've told us, given all the experiences that you've had, you managed to find that actually, here's where I go. And also in prison, that's a very difficult thing because they're, you know, although the system should be geared towards getting you to that frame of mind, the truth is it's not, because how can it be? Because you're as influenced by whoever else you're in with as much as you're influenced by the people who are trying to guide you. And you were clearly making a pretty, again, I'm going to use the word brave, because I think it's appropriate. That's not an easy decision at that stage. And so it begins. And so you decide to take every opportunity that comes.
Yeah.
You're actively looking for opportunities to improve.
Yeah.
That leads you to the Duke of Edinburgh's Award.
Yeah.
I didn't know that the DofE was active inside prison.
Wherever they can be, yeah.
Yeah, astonishing. Yeah. So tell me about that and tell me what a difference it made for you.
So I knew what the Duke of Edinburgh's Award was. You know, I heard about it at school. And I think it has a perception it's not cool. I actually would have loved it. At 14, 15 years old, I'd have loved getting out into the mountains and doing that sort of thing. But because my friends at the time weren't interested, I was disinterested. You know, you follow the people you're hanging around, don't you? And so Reading Football Club, because I was in Reading Young Offenders, they were funding the Duke of Edinburgh's Bronze Award. And so I heard about it through the gym stuff. They were the ones that tended to do the Prince's Trust, the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, that sort of stuff. And so I said to one of them, I was like, I'm really interested. And I was working in a job, and can you come and get me for it? And because prison's not easy, people sometimes think you're just walking around doing what you want to do. You know, it's very regimented. You know, you're on your landing, or certainly in Reading, you have your landing. You got like a school timetable. An hour, you might be able to go to association where you can use a library and play pool, or you might have an hour where you can go out in the exercise yard, which is just a concrete yard. Most of the time, you're behind the door. Yeah, well, this is it. That's the other thing people don't realise, that prison can often be 23.5-hour bang-up. And so many people don't realise that. Which is, a whole issue in itself. Yeah. And anyway, I was doing this job. I think I was cleaning a landing or something, and I heard them going by, like probably 50 or 60 prisoners that were going into the chapel to be told about Duke of Edinburgh's Award. And I was like, oh no, I heard the door shut. I was like, no, they've forgotten me. And then he came back, Mr. Middlemass, his name was. He came back and goes, come on, Wattsy. I was like, yes. Got in there, and I was inspired straight away. These guys stood up and they were talking about the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, and you know, they could only take 15 people. I was like, oh no, there's like 60 people here that are all signing up for it. But I remember as well, one of them saying, my dream is that one of you will be at the palace one day getting your gold award. Now, at that stage, that's not possible. There's just no way that could happen. Like, there's so many obstacles in the way. But it got the thought in my head, and I was like, I want to do it, whether I have to carry on when I'm out. Like, I knew you could do it for another 2 years, up until you're 24, so I'd be out at 22. So I was like, maybe I can just carry on doing it. I was like, I want to get to the palace and get my gold award. And I think just that thought in my head drove me a little bit.
So you were selected?
I was selected. So it's luck, really. It depended on your sentence. So because I had a longer sentence, it just made more sense. I was already being well behaved. I was already doing like the maths and the English classes, so they knew I was all right. There were various other things, but I think your sentence had a lot to do with it.
Were you working in the kitchen by this stage? Because although cooking became your D.A.V. skill, the skill part of getting your award, as I understand it, actually the reason why you went into the kitchens, as a lot of people do in prison, is because it's one of the highest paid jobs. And by the way, when we say highest paid, let's set some context there, about 12 quid a week. But 12 quid a week in prison is not nothing, right? Because you can use it and to buy, as you say, a decent bit of toothpaste, or a sort of treat yourself with a chocolate biscuit, or save it up and buy yourself a duvet, whatever. It's
right. The duvet is the important thing. So my first couple of nights in the prison, it was January 2008, which was an ice cold winter, freezing cold outside. The window, so it's like it wasn't bars, it was meshing, and then a stick that you could sort of open and close this single glazed window. The stick had gone missing on mine, and no one would fix it. I was just told to bear with it. So the window was wide open. And it's absolutely freezing. And then you don't have a duvet. You've got what I can describe as a bit like a curtain, and the mesh. It was like a baby blanket with the holes in it.
Exactly
it's
right.
That.
Yeah.
So, and then prison issue clothing as well. I think I had 2 tracksuits, two trousers, 2 jumpers. I wore everything I had, got myself up like this. I was waking up every hour, absolutely freezing. So, the things you need to get a duvet is, first of all, certainly at this time, become enhanced. So you have different ranging. You have basic, standard, enhanced, and then whatever else. Yeah. And, when you're just on standard, when you just come in, you can't buy a duvet anyway. Then you need the money. And things aren't cheaper either. You have to buy, I think it was coming from Argos maybe. And so you have to save the money. Without having money in prison, you can't do a lot either. It's like the toothpaste isn't real toothpaste, and you do need extra food. You're only getting given what you are being given. So you need extra, especially at that age when you're a growing boy, you're going to the gym, you need extra food. So it's all those little things that I think when people come out and call prison a holiday camp, I'm like, shut up. It's not a holiday camp. And often, I was a listener in the prison, and often it was the ones with that bravado, with that, I don't care, who were the ones who were really actually affected by it.
Struggling.
I really noticed.
Can we talk very quickly about being a listener before we get onto the cooking? Yeah. Where you find your real purpose. Being a listener in prison is about helping people kind of get, kind of bed in, if you like, get their heads around the fact that they're there, but also you're dealing with people who are, whatever stage they are in their sentence, who are struggling. Right. It's a big responsibility being a listener. It really is like being a Samaritan. In fact, it's linked often to the Samaritans.
So the Samaritans come in and they train prisoners to be a listener.
Yeah. So you must have had to deal with some pretty traumatic stuff in that role.
Yeah. It's hard to know what to say. You're sort of swarmed by,
of course,
secrecy, and it's all confidential.
Yeah, I don't want
We're talking 20 years ago.
But I don't want you to break any confidence.
15 years ago. But horrible things. There were people that had tried to kill themselves, wanted to. Sometimes it was really trivial stuff, and quite often it might just be missing my girlfriend, missing my kids, that sort of thing. But there were those occasional horrible ones. And it might be even that they are telling you they're going to do something. And it's a lot to take on in that situation where you're locked up with these people as well. They're in your community.
You're 19
people.
Years old.
Yeah.
When you became a listener.
Yeah, must have been. And it's a lot to take on. The Samaritans would come in, and if you had a call, as they called it, you would then have to go and debrief. And I remember after my first one, I was like, I don't need to. Yeah, go on then, let's talk. And then suddenly it all comes out, and I was like, oh my God, no, I actually did have to let that go.
In terms of the trauma that you were dealing with that individual, what they were telling you, maybe what they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
you're obviously good at it, Jon.
Well, they trained us well. But it's all open questions. Essentially, it's letting the person talk. You're just sitting there being, I suppose, a sponge and soaking up what they're letting out, and you're just giving them the sort of open dialogue so they can just talk about it. You know, I learned as well to embrace the silence. You know, you're sitting there as someone like that across the table from someone you never met before who's telling you these crazy things, and then there's a bit of silence, and you're like, I need to say something. But actually, so many times you just sit back, wait a few seconds, and they're off again and they're talking. But you see the weight that lifts off their shoulders.
This is a new skill that you're developing as well, that was obviously in you, and for all the reasons that we've discussed, hasn't had a chance to show itself.
Yeah,
you're obviously a very empathetic individual.
I think I became empathetic. Certainly from that one night. You know, learning about it, like I explained earlier, about learning about the other people that it affects.
From the night of your offence?
Yeah, I'd never realised. I just, for whatever reason, never really realised it.
You think that offence is what swung open the empathy door for you?
And now I'm, you know, I'd say I'm very empathetic. But yeah, being a listener, it was a privilege, I would say. When I look back on it, it's a privilege to be that person and have that responsibility where someone feels like they can talk to you and let out their problems. Yeah. And I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about people. And that was the volunteering side of the Duke of Edinburgh's Award.
So you're already in the kitchen, but then you have a skill element to getting the D of E.
Yeah.
You sensibly decide, I think it's cooking for me.
Yeah. So
had that kind of fire been horrible cliche, but had that fire been lit, had you already realised, actually, I love this. This is great.
Oh no, no. So I got a job in the kitchen, like we said, for the money and for the food. I wanted 2 plates of food. I wanted the little chocolate biscuits that you'd rarely get at the end of a dinner, maybe one day. Yeah. And so that's the only reason I started in the kitchen. In the prison kitchen, you're not learning how to cook. You're packing bags of breakfast packs. You're peeling potatoes, stirring a big brat pan of whatever meat. Who knows what it is.
Yeah, let's not go there. Yeah.
So you don't learn anything in the kitchen. I certainly did not become passionate about cooking in there. When I started doing an MVQ, or when that path opened up, I got a job in the officer's mess, which is very privileged position. I'd say it was probably the top job of the prison. From there, about 2.5 years into my sentence, about 2 years, 3 months into it, surprisingly, an officer came up to get his food and he said, "Oh, what's he? Do you want to go down to the Kennett unit?" This is a unit at the back of Reading Prison where I think it could hold 20. There was usually about 15 inmates there. They've been brought from all over the country, really. And it's an open unit, sort of semi-open. So you're locked in the unit, but you have a key to your door and you can have a shower and stuff, and you can go out to work.
Right.
And
so this is a resettlement
unit.
Yeah.
But I don't know why there's not more of them, because it's so handy. And you look at the lads coming out from there, we're all starting life up here rather than being released straight from prison into a hostel. The hostels are the worst thing. That's another subject.
So you go into this unit.
Yeah.
You start to work.
Most incredible thing, because I was like, oh, wow. You know, it's like I had my head down the whole time during that sentence, feeling like it was never going to come to an end, but just almost just driving forward, do what I can, get to a stage where I can give myself a better life. And then got onto that unit. It was like the sun came up. I wanted to get into cooking. They had these placements. I think it was Holiday Inn maybe, and you'd make sandwiches. And I was like, yeah, that's great. Still just thinking it's a step towards, you know, a job. And then Jamie Oliver was opening a restaurant in Reading. So this was when he started his chain. It was only number 3, I think, so they were only just starting. And obviously he had 15 all those years ago, where he took 15 apprentices each year from disadvantaged backgrounds and taught them to cook. And he's had some real successes from that.
He has.
So some, you know, we're talking now, I think it's over 20 years. And some of these chefs now are incredibly successful.
He's done amazing work with it, yeah.
Yeah. And I think it has the ripple effect, because that work there made the prison staff go, oh, maybe they'll take you in this restaurant. And you can't meet myself. I can't contact them. So, but you can sort of pressurise the officers on the unit or the governors, like, oh, can you make sure you chase up Jamie Oliver's restaurant, see if you can get me in there, get me an interview. And nothing was happening. And then I think it was like the day before the restaurant opened for its like training. And the head chef came in, and he his name's Ian. He's an American guy who I'm good friends with today. And he came in and sort of sat down with me, and do you know what? Straight away I realised he was so passionate about it. The food, the people. He was talking about how many different cultures are in a kitchen, how many different, from different nationalities, and the amount of different people you can sort of speak to and learn from. And I was like, wow, this sounds really interesting. When someone else is talking to you about their passion.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, okay, this is exciting. And I was a bit like, oh, am I going to get this job? And he was like, yes, you can come tomorrow. And they had to fast track me out. So it's a lot of paperwork to get an inmate anywhere. And they fast tracked it so I could get there on the first day of training. One of the officers walked down with me to a hotel, and we sat there and I'm watching Gennaro Contaldo cook and talk in front of people.
This is an amazing sequence of events. And, the prison system is, with some justification, it gets a good kicking for the failure of its systems. You've given us an example there, actually, of the system working pretty well.
It's down to the people who are there. It's down to the officers.
Exactly. And that's the point I wanted to make, really, is that prison is also viewed as a sort of machine. And it is, to an extent, but it's a machine full of people. And that's why prisons are full of emotions of all sorts, and mistakes and good stuff and bad stuff. Here's an example of, we don't often talk about the good stuff in prisons. This is a good story for prison because of the people that actually saw something in you. It is about those individuals, isn't it?
And that's what I've noticed. So I do go back into prisons now, and it's the staff. You realise, you see it from a different angle when I go in now, and you see they're only in the job, a lot of them, because they want to help. It's not a nice job, I don't think. It's not very good hours. I don't think it's paid very well.
It's really not a good job.
And I think there's an awful lot of people involved in it, whether they're officers or whether they're involved in the education part of it or anything else. They're in it to help make a change, to help people make a change. And I think that's incredibly inspiring. Yeah. And it was because of those people that, they were able to point me in that path, which is exactly what it didn't have before prison.
So you'd found your purpose.
I found it. I absolutely loved it. And I was going out in the morning from the prison. Ian was great with me. Like, he taught me, but in like a sort of non-obvious way. So he would get me in an hour earlier than everyone else. It'd make me iron my chef white. So I'm in the kitchen, ready for battle. And I'm ahead of everyone else. So as everyone else comes in, sometimes they're meant to be in at 8 o'clock. They're coming in at 8:02, and they're like got their messy chef whites on. And I'm there like, oh, I've already got an hour's worth of work done, and I'm here. And
subtle training.
It's completely subtle. And at the time, I was like, oh, why is he making me come here an hour early?
Yeah, interesting. So when you then are released, did you adjust easily to release?
So I had the job to go back to. So I was going in and out of the prison, and then when it came to being released, I remember this conversation with Ian, and I was feeling really awkward about it, like, oh, I'm done. And they were taking on another inmate. So it's like, oh, is he going to fill my spot? And I said, I'm getting released in a few weeks. Would I be... And I remember feeling really nervous about it. Would I be able to stay working? He was like, of course, Jon. And...
Amazing.
So, I moved into Reading, which meant I was away from where I'd grown up, which I don't for one second think I'd have gone and got involved in stuff again, but it could have still created experiences that maybe wouldn't have been very good for me if I'd have gone back and been around the same groups of people.
Of course.
So just being away from that was like a bonus. So living in Reading, working in this restaurant. However, I have sometimes said that it was the hardest thing was coming out. Because it was, prison's lonely in itself. Very lonely, but there's still other people there. Coming out, and I had the people in the restaurant, a lot of them didn't know I was in the prison. So they'd be like, oh, do you want to come for a drink after work? I'd be like, no, I can't. I did have a very strong work ethic. Like, I remember my family coming and visiting me, and we're having a bit of food on the river there in Reading, and I get a phone call, and, oh, so-and-so's not in today. can you come in? And I was like, oh, sorry. I remember I haven't seen my family properly in years. And I'm like, oh, sorry, I've got to go to work. I go get my chef whites, go and work. And I was really excited to be a part of something.
I suspect they were incredibly proud, incredibly proud of you.
I hope, yeah, I think they are.
Have they told you how proud they are?
I think they probably have. It's a funny thing nowadays is that I get strangers telling me they're proud of me rather
How does that
than
make you
coming
feel?
from family. I can't explain the feeling. It's incredible. It's to have someone who's never met you, and I get it on a daily basis. You know, now with my profile, and I'm sort of out there a lot, and people are hearing my story, and people, I'm proud of it. I hear it so often.
You should be proud of it, Jon. So you stay with Jamie for 5 years.
Yeah.
Right. Amazing training.
Yeah.
And then you were shooting forward here, but then you make another brave decision. You decide to set up on your own, and you set up your own catering business, which is successful. You're now cooking for famous people. You're cooking for TV shows, the catering for X Factor and other shows. I mean, those. Presumably there were a number of moments on that part of the journey where you're thinking, how on earth did this happen? We've also skipped over another moment, which is you going to the palace. To receive your gold DOV from Prince Philip. And I think that I'm right in saying that is 3 years after 3 years after the offence, or 3 years after you perhaps are arrested. Sorry, are put on remand.
3 years after going on remand.
Yeah.
Yeah, three and a bit.
That is, at one level you can say, God, it's 3 years. It's astonishing turnaround of someone's life.
Well, I made it to the palace as well. You remember how I had that vision in my head when that guy had spoke about it, and I'm like at the palace, and it's filmed by the BBC. That's the thing with all your prison time. Obviously, there's no photos anywhere, so to have it filmed as well, because it's all a dream to me now, and I can watch it and be like, oh my God, that was me. And I'm at the palace with the two officers who had basically made it all happen, and it's wild to come out of prison. I felt like, to give another, I don't know if analogy is the right word, I felt like I was flying when I came out, and I had that image in my head. In the weeks before I left the prison, I was picturing myself coming out the gates and just flying, and that's because of that sort of effect of the Duke of Edinburgh as well. Gave me that belief in myself, gave me obviously the tools in the terms of like a skill, but I was confident in myself, in my ability to sort of overcome any obstacles that were going to come my way and fly. And I think that's exactly what I did. I was very driven in that last year when I was on that unit. I would sort of write things and put it on the back. I don't even know where this came from, but I'd sort of write things. If I wasn't feeling confident, I'd write, I am confident. So every morning I wake up and see it, and then I am something. And I think it's those sort of affirmations, I think they're called.
So you appear on This Morning.
Are you going to talk about the vision board
and
now?
you it's an amazing moment. You can see it on YouTube if anyone wants to go and find it, because it's such a special thing.
Yeah.
And they introduce you as the chef, and you're about to you're about to cook something wonderful for them on telly, and you say, before I do, I just want to point something out to you. When I was in prison, I had a mood board where you just described it, I put these symbols, photos, and one of those things was me. I sort of manifested me, I'm quoting you inaccurately, but I'm trying to get the point across, on this programme doing what I'm just about to do.
Yeah.
And you pull up and you got it. You got the actual mood board, and you stick it in front of the camera, and there's a picture of you photoshopped on This Morning. Yeah. And then there you are on This Morning about to cook.
Yeah.
Incredible thing.
When I got the phone call to go on that, it was always a goal of mine. I mean, I believed I was going to, and I was filming these recipes, and I was getting a bit of a following and stuff. And I said to my sister, I was like, she used to help me film some of them. I said, I'm going to go on This Morning. And then she was like, what, have they confirmed it? I'm like, no, I just know it's going to happen. And I saw one of the producers had followed me on Instagram. So I was like, okay, now she's seeing my stuff. Anyway, I get an email and then a phone call. And when she phoned me, I said about the vision board, I said, this is funny because I actually photoshopped myself over Gino De Campo on the set, and it's on that vision board. And she said, oh, would you bring it in? I was like, oh.
Well, I'm glad you did.
And it was under my bed. I mean, it hadn't been up for a long time. It was under my bed collecting dust. And I took it in, and I didn't know. I didn't know if they were going to ask or not, but they said, just keep it there in case they ask, and I pulled it up. But it's a really special moment personally for me to, it must have been 7 years or more of putting that on the vision board to then it happening.
Yeah.
So when something like that, you know, a real life goal, a real big dream actually becomes a reality, I don't think there's any word to really describe that.
Amazing. Well, just congratulations. And, you know, you've gone from strength to strength. As you say, you said I've got a bit of a following on social media. Slight understatement, Jon, if you don't mind me saying. You've now written these 2 fantastic books. You know, you're smashing it. And just congratulations from every angle, really.
Thank you.
I want to ask a sort of final question on, you know, it's a bit of a cliche question, I know, but the kind of, you know, the advice that you would give. But having heard the story that you told us, bluntly, so brilliantly, and so, you know, with such detail on, you know, what happened with you and you know, and that night. You know, you know, we touched on it. Knife crime is such an issue in this country. You know, there might well be someone listening now or watching this who is involved in a situation like that, who could easily be steps away from making the mistake that you made. So the question really is, what, having now heard how you can turn, how you can make different choices, you don't need to go to prison to come to that realisation. What would you... What would you say?
Well, I would be saying going to prison is not the answer. And, I mean, if you go, then please take every opportunity, and I hope it works out. But you want to do everything you can to stop it well before you end up going into prison. And the tools are there. I think often, the thing is, in prison, it's easy because you're locked in your cell and you've got certainly distractions, but you haven't got the same distractions that you have when you're outside. And I think it's, for young people going through that sort of world, I think it's like a storm's going on a lot of the time, and it's hard to see clear. But there is a way out, and there's lots of support, and there's lots of things out there that you can sort of take on and, you know, take that first step. I think that's what it's all about as well, is taking one step, being proud of yourself that you've done that, lead it on to the next and the next and the next, and then it's a bit like a kid walking. Once you start walking, you start running, and then before you know it,
That's for those before, please God, you know, they make the mistake. For those that found themselves in prison, you know, one of the things that's pleasing for me is that this podcast is now available in prison, not in every prison, but they are rolling it out in a partnership with the Ministry of Justice. That's just happened for us. We're incredibly pleased about it. The idea that this conversation will now be listened to by people who've just arrived in prison is what we're, you know, all about. And that's another reason why I want to say thank you, because you know, it's not just you and me sitting here chatting. I'm hoping that there will be people whose lives you know, are in a difficult place, and where this conversation might be a bit useful. So thank you, Jon, for giving me time today. It's really appreciated. Congratulations on all your success.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this, dare I say, important conversation with Jon, then please do leave us a review. And if you found it helpful or even inspiring, we would be delighted if you would recommend us to your friends. You can watch the full episodes on YouTube, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and if you hit subscribe, you'll find a load more crisis conversations. As always, full transcripts are available on our website along with links. Just head to crisiswhatcrisis.com. Thank you so much for listening.